All right. We're happy to have you guys all here today and happy to get started. Sorry for a couple of technical hiccups, but yeah, we're here to talk to you today about how to implement a scalable modern security data lake. I'm from Hunters. My name's Ian. I've got my two colleagues with me from Snowflake and PennyMac. We'll introduce ourselves in a second. So I'm Ian Forrest. I'm the VP of Solutions Engineering at Hunters. We make a modern SOC platform, or SIEM. And I've got 20 years in security. I started off as software application security and database security, and I've done a lot in SOAR and automation and SIEM. And now I'm happy to be at Hunters and running our solutions engineering team. Cyrus, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Cyrus Tibbs. I'm the CISO of PennyMac. We're a national mortgage company that will send you all advertising next time rates go down to try and get some refinances out of you. I have been at PennyMac for 4 years. Prior to this, I ran cloud engineering at City National Bank, and prior to that, I was the head principal cyber architect for Southern California Edison, which is basically the bottom half of California's power. And before that, I was in the usual suspects of defense and intel contractors out of DC. So really excited to be here today, and thanks for taking time to meet with us. And I'll go and introduce John Bland.
Hey everyone, John Bland, head of cybersecurity strategy at Snowflake. Been here about 1.5 years, and kind of the role is around helping customers like Cyrus implement security use cases on Snowflake as a data platform, as well as partners like Hunters build applications on our platform. Before I came to Snowflake, I was at Splunk for a long time, and yeah, really excited about this talk today.
All right, John, I think you're starting us off here, so.
Yep. Yeah, agenda today is pretty straightforward. I'll kind of lay the foundations of a security data lake, why customers are kind of going in this direction, the benefits of it, and then I'll hand it off to Ian to kind of talk through what Hunters has built on top of the platform, and lastly, like what it looks like in real life through what Cyrus and his team has implemented at PennyMac, and we'll hopefully have some time for questions at the end. So I'm sure like most of us are here because we either have like a security data lake initiative or kind of thinking about it because the approach we have been using is kind of failing us in a few ways. First of which is like too many security solutions, point solutions out there. They all have their own data platform. Many of them have their own collection agent, and that kind of leads into like a lot of siloed data. And because the data is in different products stored in different schemas, it just really makes it really inefficient to kind of drive insights, kind of cross-tooling. And then I guess an overarching issue is kind of like scale and elasticity. I would see, my old customers, when they needed the security platform the most is when they're most likely to have security issues, performance issues, because, it's kind of all hands on deck for an investigation, potential breach or whatever. And it just because it couldn't scale to meet that like short-term dynamic need. And then lastly, and probably should be firstly, is like cost kind of spinning out of control. And I saw a lot of security customers kind of compromising on what data they collected, like into a SIEM platform, and how long they could retain that data and searchable. And those security teams really want to do that, but they're kind of balancing cost and capability. This wasn't as big of a problem on on-premise, but then when all the customers went to the cloud, data volumes exploded. It really, like the ingest-based licensing models that I think most people have moved away from by now, but like that data volume did not align with the data value, and it created a lot of problems. And then, enter products like Cribble and stuff to kind of help filter that stuff out before it hits the security platform. But it's largely not compromise that anyone wants to make. So we're kind of looking at a different approach here where we kind of separate applications from data platform, and it's more of like a data-centric approach. Like I do think that cybersecurity is a data problem, and if you have a very coherent like data strategy at the core, you're more likely to be kind of successful downstream with the different applications and analytics you do. So the data lake will be where you store all your security data. It's really cost effective. It scales dynamically as well. With Snowflake, we have an ecosystem of partners that have built applications on top of our platform that give you like out-of-the-box capabilities. And then by having all that data in one spot, it opens up a lot of like other analytic use cases. There's more to cybersecurity in like near-term log search, and you could have teams working on fraud detection or building some kind of UEBA kind of ML-based detections. And in traditional security platforms, you kind of got to move that data around to do those other use cases. So I'd been admiring Snowflake from a distance for a little bit of time. And when they announced their entry into cyber about 4 years ago, I was like, really started to like, look, is there a way for me to come over and kind of help the team out? And here I am, it all worked out. But what drove me over here was, well, I was kind of jealous of the lack of technical debt because they were born in the cloud. That's one piece. But like a lot of my I supported really large organizations in the Mid-Atlantic, like kind of like 100 terabyte a day, deployments of security platforms. And they all had they were very vocal about the challenges they needed the platform to solve that it was falling short on. And they were all kind of strengths of Snowflake. So one is removing the need to compromise on data retention. In Snowflake, all data is hot searchable, and it's a day old or a year old, and we treat that as a pass-through cost. It's using cheap cloud object storage, so like 20, 30 times cheaper than a lot of retention in a lot of platforms. And next is scalability and elasticity. I talked about the use case of all hands on deck major investigation. That's where you're going to have skip searches, performance issues, because in a lot of security platforms, you're kind of all sharing a finite amount of compute, and you can't kind of scale that up for a short-term need. So Snowflake's really strong at that. But not only that, we can it's a separation of compute from compute. So you could have hunters running threat detection use cases in one compute cluster in Snowflake. Maybe you have some compute cluster for ad hoc forensic investigation. You have another one doing some cool Gen AI, Copilot or something. All of those are in their own compute cluster. They can each scale up and down dynamically, and neither of them impact one another. That was a common challenge in a lot of those security platforms where I would see multiple deployments of the same platform, because one team would have it and they're like, hey, our workloads are really mature. We have everything scheduled out, so we're not going to have any skip searches or anything. And maybe this other team, they want to use our platform, they want to use our deployment, but we don't really trust them. Maybe they know what they're doing, maybe they don't. And it's that lack of separation of that compute that kind of drives that behavior, which is not ideal, because then you have copies of data going around. Talked about the ability to handle more than just log search. There's a lot of analytic use cases that by having the data in a data platform like Snowflake that you're now enabled to do. And we like to call it democratizing your data, meaning in most security platforms, that data is only accessible and usable through that security product. And if it can't solve a certain analytic use case that you have, teams export the data. And yeah, you can do that, but then you have data movement costs, you're double paying for storage because you're making copies, and most importantly, you're losing governance of that data. Hopefully that team that exports it out of your platform knows what they're doing, but you have no control or governance over that data once it leaves. So in Snowflake, it's different where you could layer on one or more connected applications to give you out-of-the-box capabilities that you desire. You could have teams building purpose-built Streamlit apps. You could have other teams we just have some reporting for the CISO, then we just did some Tableau dashboards. There's a whole universe of now applications and data tools that can all leverage that data in one spot, and you don't have to kind of do a bunch of exports depending on the type of analytics you desire. And then in a lot of cloud platforms, what customers desire, they don't want to do term licensing where they have to lock in for a high watermark. They want to pay for what they use. And then also put easy to use SaaS here, because there might be someone in the crowd that tried or still has scars from a Hadoop data lake back in the day. This is not the same as that. Spoiler alert, it didn't work back then. This is too much administrative burden and specialized skills needed to get value out of those old kind of security data lakes that were tried, 6 years ago. Snowflake's different, where we take that administrative burden off your hands, very easy to use platform. And then lastly, I had a lot of highly regulated industry customers, and they were unable to go to the cloud version of security platform because it was a single region service and didn't meet their RTOs and RPOs. So Snowflake being able to replicate both cross region and even cross cloud is something that those more highly regulated industries valued. To quickly give an example architecture, pretty high level. We'll go into a little more detail here in the next sections. But it's like cybersecurity is a data problem. It starts with kind of that security data lake. You can layer on what we call connected applications, Hunters being one of our connected application SIEMs. And the connected app is an app that works on top of your Snowflake account. So you still own all the data, you control the access, everything. But then you layer on, Hunters as an example. They'll take care of like data ingestion, enrichment, normalization, but the data ultimately lands in your Snowflake account. And then whenever detections fire and stuff like that, it burns compute in your Snowflake account. And then there could be, we see customers as they go down this strategy, as they evaluate new security products, they're like, all right, we need that new, if we're going cloud security or some GRC product, we want that to work well with our data strategy. And so you start to see like more connected apps in our ecosystem kind of being layered on depending on what the need is. And there could be other data sources that aren't applicable to the connected applications you have. And you could snowpipe those data sources directly into Snowflake. Snowpipe's just our name for like getting data in near real time. So you don't have to use the data pipeline necessarily for all your data of the connected applications. You have the choice of putting that data into Snowflake yourselves. And then, it unlocks a lot of different analytic use cases by having like all that data in one spot and a really like powerful data platform. And lastly, just one platform, many cyber use cases. It's not an all or nothing approach. You can start in threat detection, instant response, or you could do something more lightweight where we're just doing like KPI metrics reporting for leadership around like whatever KPIs and KRIs measure the health of a security program over time. Don't have to do it all at once. And then what we offer is you'll have buyout options for things like most customers don't want to build their own SIEM, let's be honest. Some do, but it's a small percentage. Like things like that, you just want an application. But there are other things like reporting or maybe like a purpose-built Streamlit app that teams do want to build themselves because there's nothing that like is that exact fit in the market. And with that, I'll pass it off to Ian to talk more about how Hunters has leveraged our platform and kind of what they do in this ecosystem.
Great, thanks, John. So John did a really nice job talking about how Snowflake, or how data lakes in general, but Snowflake specifically, can help organizations with problems that have always existed, problems with scale, problems with being able to make trade-offs or having to make trade-offs of what data you ingest or when you ingest it, or being able to scale when you need to do long-term search on the back end, being able to adjust that kind of compute and storage and make sure that it can manage that. But the linchpin to a lot of this is normalization. Normalization is sort of a tale as old as time, but the cyber world is changing, pretty dramatically. We can see all the different vendors that are here. We're bringing new products on board. We're taking new products off. We have overlapping. We have mergers. And how do you make sense of that data? And how do you keep up with your detections if you don't have normalization? If I have to make a detection for every specific data source, it doesn't scale. And it's not a very realistic scenario for what many people have in their security environment. And then the other thing is it's much harder if we're not normalizing data to derive insights and to correlate across different data sources. So normalization, in my opinion, is key to making any SIEM work, especially SIEMs across the data lake. So there's a couple of different ways that you can achieve normalization. One of those ways is at the source. So you could say, hey, vendor, I need you to normalize the data before it gets to when you emit it. Sounds great. It takes all the load off of your shoulders, takes off the load off the SIEM's shoulders. But what are they going to normalize to? What schema are they going to leverage that's going to be accommodating for you? And on top of that, what happens when they map a field to one schema field, and then somebody else maps a schema to a field to another schema field, and you have no way to be able to make that change? So it sounds good, and it's less work, but it's not as flexible as some of the other options. The other is in the pipeline. So you can say, okay, well, we have all these integrations, and I have a SIEM, or I have some data lake that I'm dumping data into. So let's go ahead and just leverage those and make the changes there. Or maybe I'll buy a tool or build a streaming tool that'll allow me to make those changes to the data and do that normalization process. But the problem there is, A, it's very difficult to test that process because I can only test the data as it's streaming. And the other is, that data is then getting stored in that normalized format. What if you miss data? What about the raw data? What happens if you need to make a change? Or what happens if the schema changes? So let's say you go from one version of a schema to another version of a schema. What do you do in those cases? Now I have a cutoff cutoff date. This was my data before the schema change. This is my data after the schema change, and now I have alerts or detections that need to fire differently, but depending on what version of the schema we're using. And the last, and in our opinion the best, given the people that are up here, is in the data lake. So Snowflake facilitates our ability to implement what we call the medallion architecture for data. And in the medallion architecture, we have bronze data, which is your raw data in its purest format. You have your silver data, which is your normalized data and your clean data, and then you have your gold data, which might be used to help derive business outcomes. So that's going to be stuff that you need to access quickly and can help you kind of generate the outcomes that you're looking for. Maybe aggregate data for fast lookups. Maybe it's mappings from host to IP. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But with this model where we're doing it in the data lake, it allows us to keep the raw data, so we never have to worry, did we ingest everything, did we keep everything that we need? It also allows us to do the transformations with the compute on the data lake. And the last thing is, if we think about this problem though, it could result in data duplication. So, and it's fairly complex. So the reason I say it could result in data duplication, if we're keeping the raw data, but we're also normalizing it, then we're potentially duplicating the data not just once, but maybe multiple different times, because maybe that same data maps to different event types in whatever schema that we're leveraging. So before I go any further, I mentioned that I'm from Hunters. Hunters is a SIEM that operates as a SOC platform for your organization. And this is kind of a high-level diagram of how it works. We're going to focus a lot on the data part today. But on the left-hand side, you have all of your data sources. In Hunters, we have integrations for all those different data sources. We'll ingest those. We'll normalize those. We'll dump those in the Snowflake data lake. Then we'll run our detections against those. And our detections are constantly updated. And the cool thing about the detections being managed and operated by us is we have the benefit of seeing our customers at scale in the cloud, and we can see the fidelity of those alerts and make modifications on behalf of our customers to improve that fidelity. The next piece is the triage and investigation piece. This piece is really interesting. Right? John talked about not having to make trade-offs of what data you ingest and which data you don't, and the really neat outcome of that is that I can mine the data that I have in my data lake to be able to enrich the alerts that I'm generating and then run scoring rules against those to augment their risk profile. And higher risk events will show up at the top of your SOC queue. The lower risk events will show up at the bottom of the SOC queue or might not show up at all. And the last piece is the correlation. So important thing is being able to not just enrich individual alerts, but also correlate those alerts across data sources. And the way Hunters does that is we leverage a graph database for that. We extract entities from every single event, and then we find the commonalities between those and build an attack story. So we see, maybe something started on an endpoint or maybe started an email, moved to an endpoint, moved to the cloud. We can track that attack path and evolve that as we're ingesting more and more alerts. So we'll see that attack story being built out in your environment kind of in real time. So I said we could talk about Hunters ingestion. I hope this is big enough to kind of get an idea of what it looks like, but this is in more detail, in less architecture, more architecture of how Hunters actually works. So we have our third-party APIs and apps and data on the left-hand side, and then we're leveraging AWS Fargate. And the reason that we're leveraging this kind of serverless container orchestration is to make sure that we're able to scale horizontally to the data needs. Data volume has historically been a huge problem for SIEMs, and how do I ingest all the data that I need? Fargate allows us to be able to make sure that we're able to handle any volume, handle spikes in volumes, and be able to be elastic and cost efficient. We then take that data and temporarily store it in S3. We use SNS and SQS to notify our service that we're ready to start normalization. This normalization process that's happening here is very basic. All it's doing is just making sure that the data is in the format that we expect and extracting a few key fields. It's not normalizing to our chosen schema yet. We then take that, use Snowpipe streaming to put it into the Snowflake data lake, and then we are kind of implementing that medallion model that I talked about before. And the bronze data is the raw data just stored directly in the Snowflake tables. We leverage views to materialize the data in its normalized format. And then our gold tier is aggregates. So it's going to be things like we've observed IP addresses. What are the organizational IPs that you have in your organization? Or what is the agent to host that we can map and then readily have access to be able to enrich any of the events that we have. So I've talked a lot about normalizing to a specific schema. The schema that we're normalizing to is OCSF. That's the Open Cybersecurity Schema Framework. This started in 2022, and it's specifically modeled for the cybersecurity domain. This is a schema for describing security data. It's led by AWS and Splunk, but it's been adopted by a number of different vendors, and we are active contributors to that project. And we're very active on the Slack channel. You'll see our pull requests on the GitHub. There's two different ways to interact with OCSF. You can be a producer, so there are a number of vendors out there that are producing OCSF data, and you can be a consumer, so ones that analyze OCSF data. We're sort of in both camps. We are generating integrations that will help produce OCSF from data that's being emitted from other sources, but we're also analyzing that data in OCSF format as part of our SIEM platform. So I talked about the medallion architecture at some length here, but this is kind of in more detail. So I mentioned the bronze level is the raw data. And in that bronze data, we store the raw data exactly as is, and we do a few key field extractions just for faster lookup so that you have that data available to you. Then we have our silver tier, and our silver tier is implemented in views in Snowflake. And the reason that we implemented it in views is so that as the OCSF schema changes, we can make those changes more efficiently. If the data was stored directly in that format, it'd be much harder to go back and change the structure of how that data is stored. We create a view for every OCSF event type, so things like process creations, file events, etc. Every event type and data source combination, and then we create one aggregate view for each event type. We run our search, we run detections, we run a number of different things on top of that silver data. And the outcome for analysts is not just that you have a common schema, but it also gives you a way to be abstracted away from the specific product. So instead of having to know, CrowdStrike specific format, I just need to know what are the event types that are associated with EDRs, and how do I analyze the data from, how do I analyze those event types rather than having to analyze specifically CrowdStrike's data. And lastly is the aggregations, like I mentioned. So we use that for summing up data, doing that enrichment, and performing faster lookups. Another slide on our medallion architecture, but it gives us a better idea of how specifically Hunters is using that. And we can see we're leveraging the OCSF views for search. We're doing our host investigation, so that's a very host-centric view of how we pivot and do investigations in our environment. In the OCSF view area, we also have scoring models that run on the gold and silver tiers, detections that run also on the gold and silver tiers, and that auto investigation process, like I mentioned before. The raw data is often used for deep dive investigations or threat hunting. You have access always to the complete back end of the environment, and that's kind of one of the great things about having Snowflake power the whole system. So two things that we're doing right now where we've got this implemented, two very new features of the product, is a host investigation. This allows us to take any host in the environment and look at all of the alerts that have been generated, all of the enrichment details that have been generated, all of the stories that host has been correlated to, and also all of the raw data. All the raw data in one timeline, but also all the raw data broken up into different OCSF event types that are really, really useful for being able to do deep dive investigations on any alert that we've generated in the environment. And lastly is just general search capability. So early on, one of the feedback that we got is that, hey, it's great that you're built on top of Snowflake. We love that you can scale. We love that we can ingest all the data that we have in our environment. But what do we do when our analysts don't know how to run SQL? They don't know how to generate SQL queries. They maybe know SPL, but even then, they're not experts on that. So we built a very easy interface to be able to search over those OCSF views, return that data in the event types, and allow for easy pivoting for any kind of threat hunting or deep dive investigation that you might do outside of an individual host. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cyrus and take it away.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you all. So I'll start with, there's this debate that goes on between platform versus best of breed. And so I'll stand here and put my flag in the ground and say I think best of breed is a better approach. I think that when you go with a platform perspective, you kind of limit yourself in your negotiating power because all of your eggs are in one basket, which can be very impactful to you. And Hunters was really Hunters and Snowflake together were really the tool that allowed me to adopt and embrace a best of breed strategy, where I'm able to say, okay, Hunters is sort of the XDR brain of where all my detection activity goes. I can align the best EDR, the best NDR, whatever tools we're using. We work with Hunters to onboard those tools, and it gets pulled right into the data model, and then that data goes right into our Snowflake, where we normalize and operate on that. So I think it's more about, instead of picking the best tools, it's thinking about your value chains, right? So if we're talking about in this, it's your detect, contain, recover value chain. Not all those products are going to be integrated. So if I have say, my data governance and access control, right? I will scan my environment and I know exactly where we have high harm sensitive data and I know who has access to it. But that's information I need to feed into my SOC, right? So you're not going to have an integration between your identity governance systems and your SOC systems typically, and that's typically not in a platform. But we can then take that data from all those different sources, bring it into Snowflake, and then feed it to where we need to feed it to so that we can actually enrich across our assets without needing to be in one platform that works, right? Because ultimately what we're doing is we're connecting, we have about I think 20, 25 sources of data we send into Hunters that gets dropped into our Snowflake. Then also our data engineering teams and our data teams, they pull data from all the other systems too. So all of the non-security data that helps me enrich my world, I have access to all of that within my Snowflake. So between Hunters and Snowflake, we really and I don't have to pay for the data engineers. There's already a team doing that. So it really opens me up to a lot of flexibility in what I want to choose. The integrating new data sources takes me a week to two, and it's like a traditional BI world. It's kind of like any question I can think of answering, I can get that data into the Snowflake and Hunters and actually operate on that. So Hunters, from our perspective, we're 100% in Amazon Web Services, and all of our infrastructure is in there. And so anybody who's in AWS, there's a population of alerts that we all need, and they're probably very similar, right? It's this undifferentiated heavy lifting of creating those alerts. So if you have a traditional SIEM that doesn't have that kind of out of the box that works for you, I'd rather just buy that. Right? If I have to buy an expensive SIEM and pay for data engineers and pay for specialized proprietary services, to get me help on that, that's a pretty heavy lift. Whereas Hunters is really almost like just they're my detection engineering team for traditional cyber stuff, and I can focus my team on things that are differentiated for PennyMac. So they basically drop all the raw data into our Snowflake. And when I wanted to first create my data models, I didn't have to go to a cyber vendor at all. I went to an offshore BI vendor. I got two guys for $30 an hour, and I said, hey, I need to normalize all this data. And they did it in a month and a half. And it cost me almost nothing, and they're always available. So now I've opened myself up that when I need support, I don't need to wait in line for the Splunk guy who's 5 months booked back. I can call any data company I want, and they say, hey, this is the question I'm trying to solve. I'm the subject matter expert. They're the ones that know how to work in that, and then that democratizes that. And we did a kind of a garage-style project where they came in, they trained our staff, and all of us are kind of operating in that. So instead of writing Splunk queries, we're writing SQL queries, and there's a lot more training available to it as well. So then we also build custom analytics that inside of Hunters, things that we need to do that are specific to our environment. And so now, I'm not spending my time building undifferentiated cyber signal. Right, I'm focusing on specific application security problems, data security problems, being able to kind of go really deep in places that I wasn't before because I'm not spending as much time focusing on my infrastructure and those challenges. So one of the things we always talk about is the talent problem in cyber. I'm going to say that I think this is a self-imposed problem. I think we created this problem because the cyber world traditionally grew up out of infrastructure because when we were all on-prem, everybody had a custom infrastructure, and it was really different. So you had to have yourself set up in a way to, how do you design a detection engineering function that can cover your custom situation? And so that kind of led us down the path toward building these data silos. So a lot of, what we call SIEM, business data teams, they call it a data silo, right? They see it as why is this security team spending all this money to do all this duplicative work? They're building they have their own data engineers, they have their own data analysts. It's like, why don't we align to those data teams? So I think that what security teams need to do is, if you look at the biggest cost in a security program, it's your SIEM and the associated resources. So imagine if you're able, and so we do about 6 terabytes a day, and I built very large SIEMs in my past in some other companies, and I can tell you I'm paying like about 20% of what I would pay before, and all of that money I can invest in people, I can invest in training, I can invest in AppSec, DataSec, and really go deeper into the shift left mentality. So now when I'm hiring people, I don't have to look for cyber people. So my team was, when I first joined PennyMac, I was hired to scale the security team up. I started with 5 people. In 4 years, I'm at 52, and I don't have any problem hiring people, because when I want to find a data analyst, I just go find a data analyst, I send them to a SANS course, and now I got a cyber data analyst. And it's easy. All I have to do is teach them SQL and Python. Because we essentially, we use Streamlit. We plug Streamlit into our Snowflake data lake, and then we build our apps. If there's an app if there's something that we can't find in Hunters, or it's not, that integration doesn't exist in another tool, I can build that together. So an example of this is, like, I'm a mortgage company, so we have extremely sensitive information on people. So I take data governance and data access really seriously. So I can take the data from my data classifier, the data from my access control system, and then my log data, and I can answer 3 simple questions. Where is the data? Who has access to it? And who isn't using that access, right? Typically, you'd have to buy one large comprehensive access system to do this, but I can just basically join these 3 tables together and immediately drive action off of it, right? And we can drive action from that. So it really alleviates our talent shortage, and I can focus more on I think the harder resources to find, which is your DevOps and AppSec people. Lastly, cost transparency. I think this is a big one. So personally, I think the ingestion-based pricing is predatory. I think that when they charge you based on the amount of data you're putting, it's messed up. Because if you think about it, on their end, it's a step cost, right? If I have 4 terabytes or 7 terabytes, they're probably still just paying for 2 servers to handle that. But then if my data volumes go up, they're just scaling their 1 or 2 servers, but I'm paying the same amount of money for every single additional data I add. So when I first joined PennyMac, I'll tell a quick story. I went to our traditional SIEM, and I was like, oh, we don't have network data in there. So I put the network data in there, and I got a call from our head of infrastructure saying, what the hell are you doing? Tell me why you need this data. Why is this here? And I'm like, look, I might need this in a serious incident. And he's like, absolutely not. I'm not paying the ingestion price for this, right? The other part of it is, if you think about it in cloud, right, when they're in cloud, they have all these auto-scaling things going on. So they're looking at your regular usage and saying, Cyrus needs like this much infrastructure, right? But that's because most of the time we're playing touch football and we're doing like the last 24 to 48 hours of phishing data. That's what you're doing most of the time. But when you're in the Super Bowl, you're going to need that network data. You're going to want to reconstitute what happened, right? So having a model where it's ingestion-based, you're paying the same amount of that data regardless of what you're using it for. So in the Snowflake, in the Hunters model, you have a fixed cost based on your assets. And in the Snowflake model, they don't abstract compute and storage away from you, right? So when I'm like, if I can run my warehouse at a small size most of the time, and then I say, hey, we're about to need to run some big queries, we can go in ourselves. I don't have to like wait for my queries to fail and run slowly. I can go in myself and say, hey, resize our warehouse to extra large because we have some extra large queries we need to run to do, a 6-month look back or something like that. So you have a lot more control over your cost structure. And the other part is that it really scales for us, right? I don't worry about scale anymore because the storage cost in Snowflake, it's S3 cost. That's extremely inexpensive, right? It's as cheap as you're going to get object storage. So I actually am at the point now where we're seeking out data. So we've moved our whole company off of the traditional SIEM because we had application developers that were basically like, they go in and they run one query to check one thing they care about. And I was like, we can build you a Streamlit app that does that, and it costs a fraction of that, and you don't have to pay for your data feed in there. So we basically are finding everybody's use case where they're kind of going in the SIEM and running their regular query. We're finding those, and we just build them. So our team actually is now kind of like fully aligned to the data team. We're almost an extension of our company's data team, and we're solving those problems together. So whenever there's like log data analytic use cases, they actually come to our team now, and we're providing more business value out of this than just the security use case. So I'm in the mode of, look, don't think about it, just throw it in there. We'll figure it out later. I don't have to make compromises about, oh, well, I don't know if I need all my network data, or I don't need all my AD data, or all this. I don't have to think about that anymore because I'm just paying storage costs. My Snowflake team came to me one month and they were like, hey, you're paying like $20,000 a month for your 6 terabytes a day. Like, this is pretty high, because in their mind it's a big number, and in my mind I'm like, don't worry about it. It's not that bad compared to like what it could be or what it was. So I've had a lot of great success with this. It's really changed me to do a best of breed architecture. It's given me much more negotiating power with my vendors, because they know I can just pull them out, plug somebody else into Hunters, and it just takes me a week or two to normalize that data, and they're replaced. So I don't have the situation where I have a vendor that can really, there's always a couple there who are in line there, but most of my vendors are pretty interchangeable. And then now I can take things from my data governance value chains, access value chains, detection and response, and I can bring those insights together really effectively and inexpensively without having to endure the cost of a platform switch like we're all being marketed to do right now. So with that, I will open it up to any questions you guys may have.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions? And I can bring the mic around to you. Otherwise, we can ask a couple questions of you if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah.
Any questions in the audience? Okay. Well, one thing you talked about was being able to separate like storage and compute. And I think about that a little bit in like how you're resourcing as well. Like within your organization, you're sort of doing that with the people that you're interacting with. You're saying, hey, I need to do some data analytics. I can just go find the data guy to do it, and you can be the expert. Does it change how you're hiring like the cyber resources within your organization too?
Yeah, I mean, so the resources who work in Snowflake and Hunter, it's 4 guys. It's four people who work in there. And I don't have to hire any data engineers, because I can just either Hunters does that for me, or I just ride on the data engineering pipelines that the data team that's running Snowflake already has. So for me, it's definitely allowed me to, I've refocused that budget towards application security people, data security people. So really I'm focusing on pure cyber people as opposed to trying to duplicate effort that is already going on.
The other question I had is it's a little bit of a different approach, right? I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are still using traditional SIEM because it's what everybody uses. You don't get fired for buying IBM, right?
Yeah.
But how does your team react to it? Like, are they excited? I mean, what do they feel about this?
My team loves it, right? So we've been in the Snowflake Hunter space for 4 years now. And I have a rule with my team that every 3 years we evaluate the space that we're in. We do the vendor bake-offs and see what's out there. And so we did Hunters in Snowflake last year, and the whole team was like, everything that we're looking at, the value benefit doesn't justify the cost of switching, right? And it's always there's always different trade-offs that aren't worth it. And we're like, anything that we saw that we might want, we can just plug into Snowflake our own and build ourselves, or we talk to Hunters and they're a dedicated startup. They're not trying to build a big platform. They're like, hey, we want to be the best agnostic EDR. So if I come to them with a new data source, we work together to fix that, and it's been awesome. We basically have a Slack channel set up with Hunters, and I feel like they're essentially like an extension of our team, because when we need something new, they respond to us pretty quickly. So I don't think that, for us, it's really how do we plug more things into it and be part of the journey to kind of add more data sources and enrich deeper. But it's super, we're really excited about it. We have no change about it. I think this architecture, everyone on my team endorses it, and we bring on new people and they get really excited. They go take some SQL training, and because if you think of in the grand big world of data analytics, SQL is not hard. And for what you need in security, it's pretty much table views for most stuff. You're not talking difficult things to write here. So there's definitely been a lot of excitement and collaboration around that, and a lot of testing that we're doing there.
Okay, and maybe one more question for John, actually. John, you mentioned you came over to help build out the security practice at Snowflake, and I'm curious, as customers are thinking about moving to a data lake-backed security solution, what are the hurdles? What is their hesitation, or where what do you see, and what's the adoption level for you guys on the Snowflake side?
I mean, there's a lot of challenges. I think a lot of like pretty much every customer I talk to is ready to break up with their SIEM, but they don't know how. And maybe they have like scars from some ArcSight migration 6 years ago, and they're like, this is kind of a large, risky project to take one all at once. So I think it's the biggest challenge is like, how do you kind of phase out the old approach that doesn't work for them, and like thoughtfully phase in use cases on like a security data lake, so they can get used to this new model, get used to the platform, and kind of, peel away some of that like perceived complexity and risk in that migration. But yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, maybe they've built, dashboards and alerts over the last 5 years on a platform. They're like, well, we got to figure out what we're going to do with that. Some are going to migrate, some are probably not worth migrating, and there's a lot of stickiness to security tools that I think, that cause customers to kind of delay these migrations, even though they know it's like what we're doing is not a go-forward direction, but we're scared to do it all today.
Okay, and it wouldn't be 2024 if I didn't ask about this, but you mentioned a couple of challenges that customers could have. It could be dashboards, it could be less familiarity with SQL, and this is for both of you, really. But like, Gen AI is a thing, and it's always evolving and improving. How do you see that as being a way to help facilitate that transition? I know I saw a cool demo of Snowflake doing some pretty cool stuff with dashboards at one point in time, and then I imagine that there might be some interesting things from like a SQL perspective, Cyrus, that your team could take advantage of.
So we definitely use Gen AI a lot to help us write queries. We can take our schemas and tell it this is our schema, and we need to write a query that does this, and it helps us get a lot of the way there. So that's been really helpful. Even within hundreds themselves, the explainability pieces of things. So when we get an alert, everybody here at some point has probably gotten an alert with some obscure command line, and you go and do a whole bunch of research to figure out what that command line means because it's not something you're familiar with. Now that's kind of built in, and you get that explainability right away. I also think what Snowflake is doing in AI is super exciting. I think they're going to be adding a lot of like search features and explainability features that I'm sure John can expand upon a little bit here. That we're definitely, I go to the Black Hat conference just like the Snowflake conference now to learn what new things we can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the last year I feel like AI and cyber has been largely like co-pilots. There's a lot of security kind of co-pilots out there that help, like what you said, natural language to complex SQL queries, or okay, we got these results back, like using Gen AI to provide a narrative that's easy to understand, like what those results mean. It's largely around like how do we make that junior analyst more productive. But I'm interested to see where it goes in SOAR platforms instead of kind of building those playbooks that are sometimes it's involved to build and maintain them. Like, how does AI play a role in SOAR and making it more dynamic in how those decisions are made? And then I would really like to see someone like stick the landing on using AI to normalize data as it comes in, so we don't have to keep knowing, oh, it's this data source, we're going to normalize it this way. Like, we should be able to train an LLM to recognize, like, oh, it's this data source, and this is how we should normalize it. Because right now it's still like everyone does it one data source at a time. Like, if it's a source a product doesn't support, their team has to write, all right, here's our new ingestion and normalization approach for this data source, and it's like inefficient.
Cool. Yeah, and actually, funny that you mentioned that using the LLMs to normalize data. Our team internally often uses that to make our normalization process much faster. So that will get us 85% of the way there. Not 100% of the way there, but gets us quite a bit of the way there so that we don't have to do as much work. But I'm going to open it up for John or Cyrus to ask any questions that you might have.
I would say one final comment I would say is that having a simple architecture is very nice to have. Having like one place for all my data lives, one place for all my detection engineering, and like I think a lot of things to think about architecture to also think about is that like when you ask yourself the question like how much of your data do you really need real time? Like if your data is 2 minutes old or real time, that's a huge cost difference. Even though from a security team's perspective, it's not significant, but from a cost perspective, so again, like having this model, you have control over that. You can basically say, hey, I'm okay if this data is an hour old and this needs to be 1 minute old, and you get those kind of flexibility options. So for me, architecturally, like my background is the security architect, and so for me, having a really simple architecture around my data has been extremely powerful for us. So I'm sure other customers have similar experiences to that, but that's really been one of the big value chain here. It's kind of like my final thought on this one. Yeah.
Awesome. John, anything you wanted to add, or?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, nothing more to add.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we close out, if there are? Otherwise, I want to thank John and Cyrus both for co-presenting. Also want to thank all of you for attending. And then last thing is the Hunters booth is just down over there. We're 4385, I believe. What? 4834, my bad. I was way off. But 4834, you'll see us in these shirts. You've probably seen us walking around. A couple other things to think about. We just released our first Capture the Flag. It was a lot of fun. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, we can certainly do one like hosted regionally in your area. We can also walk you through how to do investigations of the data that we had in those Capture the Flag scenarios. So if you're interested in finding more about Hunters, go visit us at the booth, and we'll be happy to schedule some time with you.